despite incredibly rapid technological advances, and we're talking about artificial intelligence suddenly executing tasks that, honestly, we thought were decades away. Absolutely nothing replicates the human brain's capacity to contribute to society.
Right. Yeah, nothing comes close.
And yet we just drastically underinvest in it. I mean, we take our single greatest asset completely for granted.
We really do. We treat human cognition like it's just a given, right? Like this endless resource that requires absolutely no maintenance. And the data is making it very clear that this assumption is becoming, well, economically disastrous.
Welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive. Our mission today is to explore a massive fundamental shift in how the global economy is starting to value human potential.
Yeah, it's a huge paradigm shift.
It really is. So we are unpacking a highly detailed 2026 Insight Report. This is from the McKinsey Health Institute in collaboration with the World Economic Forum, and it's titled The Human Advantage: Stronger Brains in the Age of AI. The goal here is to figure out why the world's top economists and health experts are suddenly saying that brain capital is the ultimate competitive advantage, and how you can apply this concept to your own life and career. Okay, let's unpack this. What exactly do they mean when they say brain capital?
So it's a completely new framework for evaluating human output. Basically, brain capital is a combination of two distinct but intimately connected elements. First, you have brain health.
Okay.
This is the biological foundation. I mean, it means optimal physical brain functioning, promoting healthy neurological development, and, actively treating mental or substance use conditions.
Right, the physical side.
Exactly. And then second, you have brain skills. So these are the higher order cognitive abilities that sort of sit on top of that biological foundation. Things like complex problem solving, emotional intelligence, and adaptability.
So it's essentially like the physical hardware, the intangible software of the mind, right? Wrapped into one unified economic concept.
That's a great way to put it, yeah, the hardware and the software.
And to understand how to build that software, the advanced brain skills, we first have to look at the massive hidden costs of neglecting the biological hardware.
Oh, the economic and human costs of inaction on the biological side are just staggering. I mean, global health data indicates that brain health conditions account for 24% of the total global disease burden.
Wait, 24%?
24%, yeah. And that encompasses mental and neurological disorders, strokes, and self-harm. It's massive.
That's incredible. And the McKinsey analysts, they calculated that scaling proven medical and lifestyle interventions could avert something like 267 million years lost to early death or disability.
Right, what epidemiologists refer to as DALYs, or disability-adjusted life years.
Okay, yeah, dailies. Averting those 267 million lost years globally by 2050, that would generate up to $6.2 trillion in cumulative GDP gains.
Trillion,
Yeah.
with a T. It is a massive financial incentive. But what's crucial to understand about building this biological foundation is the life course approach.
What do you mean by that?
Well, brain health isn't a problem that suddenly manifests when you turn 70, Half of all mental health vulnerabilities and conditions actually appear by the age of 14.
Wow.
Yeah, and 3/4 are present by age 24.
Wait, hang on. If half of these biological vulnerabilities are locked in by the time someone is 14 years old, is it too late for you if you're listening to this as a 40 or 60-year-old adult? Like, if the foundation is already poured, are we just stuck with the hardware we have?
What's fascinating here is that the answer is definitively no.
Oh, good. Phew.
Yeah, don't panic. The brain remains incredibly plastic throughout our lives. The research highlights the U.S. Pointer study, which specifically looked at older adults who are at risk for cognitive decline.
Okay, and what did they find?
They proved that combining lifestyle interventions, meaning neuroprotective diets, cardiovascular exercise, and rigorous cognitive training, it actively protects and can even regenerate brain health.
That's wild. But how does that actually work mechanically? I mean, how does going for a run and changing your diet rebuild cognitive hardware?
It comes down to blood flow and cellular inflammation. So aerobic exercise increases the flow of blood to the hippocampus and triggers the release of something called brain-derived neurotrophic factor.
BDNF.
Exactly, BDNF, which essentially acts like fertilizer for growing new neural connections. And at the same time, specific neuroprotective diets reduce systemic vascular inflammation, which prevents the degradation of white matter.
So you are physically upgrading the hardware by targeting the body and the mind simultaneously.
Exactly. You can't separate them.
And, that systemic connection between the body and the mind brings up a really critical gender disparity found in the research. I was shocked by this. Two-thirds of people living with Alzheimer's globally are women.
Yeah, it's a stark statistic, and the scientific community is, well, they're finally starting to map out the biological mechanisms behind it.
Because for a long time, they just assumed women lived longer.
Right, right, right. But it's much more complex than that. Women disproportionately experience conditions that shorten their overall health span, things like severe migraines or autoimmune issues, and those trigger chronic neuroinflammation.
Which degrades the hardware.
Exactly. Furthermore, natural biological transitions introduce very specific cognitive vulnerabilities. During menopause, for example, the precipitous decline of estrogen, which is a highly neuroprotective hormone that helps regulate brain metabolism, that drop, can significantly increase the risk of cognitive decline.
Because it alters the way the brain actually metabolizes glucose for energy, right?
Exactly. It essentially creates an energy crisis in the brain, which is strongly associated with symptoms of mild cognitive impairment. And, despite half the global population going through this, the first comprehensive mapping of the maternal brain from preconception through postpartum wasn't even published until 2024.
That is just, it's baffling.
It really is.
We are clearly just scratching the surface of understanding the hardware. But the measurement tools are improving, right? Like,
Yeah.
there's a new metric they mentioned called the Brain Care Score.
Yes, the Brain Care Score. It evaluates 12 modifiable risk factors, things like blood pressure, sleep, diet, stuff you have control over.
And researchers found that just a 5-point higher score on this index is associated with a 43% lower risk of developing cardiovascular disease, plus a 31% lower incidence of certain cancers, like colorectal and breast cancer.
Which perfectly illustrates the point that you cannot silo the brain from the rest of the body. Lowering the systemic inflammation that causes cognitive decline, it simultaneously starves cancer cells and protects the heart.
The hardware is completely integrated.
100%.
So we know we can physically protect the biological brain, and we know there are trillions of dollars at stake if we don't. So let's look at the software side. What is a healthy brain uniquely required to actually do right now?
That is the big question.
Right. Because in an era where I can type a prompt and have an AI agent write software code or, summarize a 100-page brief in 10 seconds, what is the actual value of human cognition?
Well, this requires a fundamental redefinition of what we even consider a skill. The World Economic Forum distinguishes between following a known recipe and inventing a completely new recipe under intense pressure.
The known recipe being the routine workflow.
Yes. Anything that follows a predictable, repeating pattern, whether it's data entry, basic legal document review, standard coding, that's a known recipe.
And algorithms excel at known recipes.
They do it better and faster than we ever could. But brain skills, the human software, these are the higher order functions. We are talking about metacognition, complex decision-making, systemic resilience, and emotional intelligence.
Metacognition is such a critical term there. It's essentially the ability to think about your own thinking.
Exactly.
Being able to recognize your own cognitive biases in real time, or adjust your strategy when a project goes completely off the rails. An AI cannot step back and ask itself if it's solving the right problem to begin with.
Right. It lacks that self-awareness. And that metacognition is precisely what formal education systems often fail to teach. Yet it has an outsized impact on human performance.
It's not.
The workplace urgency for this software upgrade is immediate. The report notes 59% of employees will need additional intensive training to meet evolving skill demands by 2030. Brain skills are vastly overrepresented in the top traits needed for the future of work.
And the economics of building these higher order skills are just undeniable. If we look at the Heckman curve, which is an economic model analyzing human development, it shows that investing in the earliest years of life yields the absolute greatest economic returns.
It really does.
Like the Carolina Episcopalian Project demonstrated a 13.7% annual return on early childhood investments.
And the mechanics of those early interventions are remarkable. There's another landmark 20-year study in Jamaica that showed a 25% increase in adult wages for kids who received high-quality early stimulation.
Wait, 25% higher wages as adults? But what did that stimulation actually look like? They weren't just handing toddlers flashcards, right?
No, not at all. In the Jamaican study, community health workers visited homes weekly. They taught parents how to play, converse, and interact with their toddlers using just everyday household items.
Just normal stuff around the house.
Yeah. Because during the first few years of life, a child's brain forms over 1 million new neural connections every single second.
1 million per second. That's hard to even conceptualize.
It's incredible.
Mhm.
By teaching the caregivers how to actively engage the children, they physically built thicker neural pathways during the brain's critical pruning phase.
Like what?
And that early structural integrity directly translated into higher emotional regulation and complex problem-solving abilities 2 decades later.
So it literally rewired their baseline capacity to learn.
Yes.
Okay, let me push back on this whole AI narrative for a second.
Sure, go ahead.
Because if AI can now analyze our massive spreadsheets, draft our emails, manage our schedules, aren't the cognitive demands on the average worker actually going down? Shouldn't our brains be getting a break?
It's a very intuitive assumption, but it actually represents a fundamental misunderstanding of the technology. AI tools require more strategic management, not less.
Really? More management.
Absolutely. The operational ability to use and manage AI effectively has grown sevenfold in just 2 years. What the modern workforce is transitioning into are what they call hybrid intelligence environments.
So the AI acts as the baseline processing power, but the human provides the steering wheel.
Exactly. In a hybrid intelligence environment, the AI handles the massive data retrieval, the heavy lifting, the routine formatting, but the human must supply the ethical judgment, the creative synthesis, and the sustained mental stamina to direct the AI.
That makes sense.
If you hand complex tasks over to an algorithm without the higher-order human metacognition to guide and verify it, the output degrades rapidly. You lose your competitive edge entirely.
So the ROI on early childhood development is up to 9 to 1 in some middle-income countries. Upgrading adult brain health and brain skills could add trillions to the global GDP. The scientific and economic cases are essentially bulletproof.
Right.
So why aren't massive corporations and global governments already pouring unlimited money into this?
Well, we run into two massive systemic hurdles: the measurement problem and the funding problem.
Let's look at measurement first. Traditional gross domestic product GDP is terrible at capturing human potential. We have historically valued physical assets. Like we know exactly how to depreciate a factory, a tractor, or a fleet of delivery vehicles.
Down to the penny.
Right? But our global economic systems have absolutely no built-in mechanisms to measure a nation's cognitive adaptability or its workforce's mental resilience.
But that lack of visibility is beginning to change. Organizations are pushing tools like the Brain Capital Dashboard.
Right, I saw that in the report.
Yeah, it tracks over 100 countries on metrics that actually reflect cognitive infrastructure. Instead of just looking at manufacturing output, it integrates data from the World Health Organization and the OECD to track things like suicide rates, participation in organized adult learning, and access to neurosocial services.
There's also a push to create satellite accounts. And I found this concept fascinating because you obviously can't easily rip up and replace GDP overnight. Economists propose creating secondary accounting systems that orbit a country's core economic statistics.
Mm-hmm.
These satellite accounts would specifically track national investments in brain capital and calculate the ongoing cost of cognitive inaction, running perfectly parallel to traditional GDP.
It provides the vital data without entirely disrupting traditional accounting. But, even if we measure it perfectly, we still face the funding problem. Building brain capital carries incredibly long payback periods.
Yeah, that makes sense.
If a government invests in the kind of early childhood community programs we saw in the Jamaican study, it might take 20 years to see the increased tax revenue and reduced healthcare costs.
And the current global infrastructure is just non-existent. I mean, there are only 0.93 neurosurgeons per 100,000 people globally.
And in low-income countries, the number of neurosurgeons per 100,000 people is literally zero.
Zero. Wow.
Which means traditional capital markets, which operate on quarterly earnings reports, are terrified of the risk. But there is a brilliant historical parallel here: the clean energy sector.
So what does this all mean? If you look at the mechanics, investing in brain capital right now is exactly like investing in solar panels 20 years ago.
Yes.
Because in the early 2000s, solar and wind infrastructure was clunky, the supply chains were fragmented, the initial capital expenditure was massive, and traditional institutional investors just wouldn't touch it. But the future macroeconomic upside was completely unavoidable.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the clean energy transition didn't happen because traditional banks suddenly became altruistic. It happened because public and private actors coordinated to change the financial mechanics.
They forced the issue.
Exactly. They utilize blended finance, catalytic philanthropy, and public-private partnerships to intentionally de-risk the market. We need the exact same financial architecture for brain capital today.
That means utilizing outcome-based mechanisms, right? Like
Yeah.
social impact bonds.
Precisely. In a social impact bond, private investors front the capital for a public health initiative, say, a massive rollout of maternal cognitive health screening.
Okay.
The government only pays the investors back with a premium if the program meets strict predefined metrics, like a measurable drop in early childhood developmental delays. The private sector absorbs the upfront risk, and the public sector only pays for actual results.
Okay, so knowing how to fund and measure brain capital is great at a macro level if you were, sitting at the World Bank. But how does an actual organization or a manager listening to this deep dive right now implement this tomorrow?
Right, practically speaking.
Yeah, how do we stop brain capital from just becoming another meaningless human resources buzzword printed on a corporate break room poster?
It requires a massive shift in governance. Brain capital must move from being a siloed, chronically underfunded HR initiative to a core CEO and board-level priority. Treating your employees as depreciating physical assets, basically just burning through their cognitive bandwidth until they quit, is a massive strategic blind spot when AI is fundamentally changing how work gets done.
To solve that blind spot, organizational experts lay out the 5A's framework. It's a literal roadmap for structural change. First is Aspire. This means establishing brain capital as a strategic priority owned by the board of directors, not just middle management. You need a C-suite executive sponsor.
Second is assess. You cannot fix what you haven't mapped. Companies need to analyze their workforce data to identify which roles are most exposed to AI workflow changes.
Right.
If you have a department of junior data analysts whose primary tasks are easily automated, their cognitive load and job security are highly vulnerable.
Then you architect. You prioritize the specific support those vulnerable areas need and build a rigorous financial business case for the investment. You don't just launch a wellness app and call it a day. You redesign the workflow.
Exactly. And fourth is ACT. You launch targeted pilot initiatives with very clear key performance indicators.
And finally, advance. You take the data from those pilots and scale the successful programs to all levels of the workforce, institutionalizing the capability building.
It becomes part of the company DNA.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Researchers conducted a 30-country study of global workers to figure out what traits actually allow an employee to survive this AI transition. They found that adaptability and self-efficacy are the absolute top determinants of whether an employee can benefit from AI integration.
Self-efficacy being the deeply held belief in your own capacity to execute a task and achieve a goal. It is the psychological armor required to navigate rapid change.
It's not their baseline coding skills, it's their mental resilience. And because of this, modern leaders must manage their mental and emotional energy as rigorously as elite athletes manage their physical performance.
We are actually seeing executives use biometric wearables to track stress, enforcing strict cognitive recovery blocks during the day, and undergoing psychological flexibility training.
It's treating the executive brain like a high-performance engine that requires specialized fuel and cool-down periods.
And the financial validation for this approach is incredibly robust. One multinational tech company implemented a systemic program that went far beyond basic corporate lip service. They provided their managers with immediate access to evidence-based self-care libraries, mandatory one-on-one behavioral coaching sessions, and intense interpersonal skills training.
And what was the result of all that?
They documented an 11.6-fold return on investment. By giving managers the software skills to navigate complex emotional and strategic challenges, they drastically lowered team attrition, reduced burnout-related absenteeism, and accelerated their product shipping timelines.
I mean, an 11.6x ROI is a metric any chief financial officer on the planet would approve.
This raises an important question, though. How do companies integrate this into the daily workflow without it feeling like just another burden?
Right.
If brain skills training is just another mandatory Zoom module you click through while eating lunch on a Friday afternoon, it fundamentally fails. It has to be embedded into the actual job design. It must dictate how performance is measured and how teams are structured to communicate during an AI rollout.
It has to become the air the organization breathes.
Yeah.
Well, we have covered some serious ground today. Let's briefly summarize this journey. We started with the biological reality of the brain, the hardware, and the trillions of dollars and millions of lives lost to neglecting systemic inflammation and cognitive decline. We moved into the higher order software skills like metacognition and emotional intelligence that are urgently required to outpace and manage artificial intelligence. We explored how global finance is attempting to build the measurement tools and impact bonds needed to fund this transition. And finally, we broke down how organizations can literally restructure themselves from the board level down to protect and enhance their most valuable asset.
And I want to remind everyone listening, this isn't just an abstract briefing for policymakers or tech CEOs. This is intensely personal to you.
Definitely.
Whether you are a parent looking at how to actively stimulate early neural pathways for your kids, an adult adopting a neuroprotective diet to lower systemic inflammation, or an employee learning how to ethically steer a new AI tool at work, your personal brain capital is your most vital asset. It is the only thing that cannot be automated.
Absolutely. Which brings us to a final thought for you to mull over today. As you increasingly use AI to outsource the routine data entry and known recipes in your workday, are you accidentally letting your own underlying brain skills atrophy? Or are you intentionally using that newly freed up mental energy to rigorously train your mind for the kind of complex, creative, and empathetic problem solving that no machine will ever replicate?
The tools are changing, but the human advantage remains entirely in how we choose to build our minds.
Keep upgrading that software and actively take care of the hardware. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions and keep exploring.